G'day, I'm Ben McKecken from Hope Mornings with Laura Bennett from Hope Afternoons. Hello, Laura.
Hello, hello.
This is Following the Chosen. We are talking about episode 6 of season 5. This episode, where does Mary Magdalene end up after that? And we need to talk about this more, that abduction.
Yeah, well, so she ends up with Nicodemus. It's his reintroduction into the series. It's been a little while since we've seen him. There he is. And I was curious to think why they made it. Why did they need to make it such a big kind of cliffhanger reveal? And maybe some of that is just TV storytelling. You need a device, you need a hook, you need something to make us be like, ooh. But then it's kind of like, is this really, ooh? Like, did it have to be? Did it need to be? I don't know. But we do
I totally
learn.
agree, Laura. And didn't you find that as much as Nicodemus was a beloved character in The Chosen, in season 1, he was pretty defining, and his conversation with Jesus about new life and rebirth and those sorts of incredible spiritual and salvation truths, that was fantastic. And that, I'm sure, lingers with fans of The Chosen. But agreed, why the Nicodemus is back had to be so sort of mysterious. And you in our last conversation touched on this as well. The polite word is awkwardness, but there's way more going on in Mary Magdalene having a bag over her head, being taken by men to somewhere that for some unknown reason to everybody, including her, they're not telling her.
No, and to think that she would just trust that that's okay is just, I feel like it goes against every female fiber in your body. Okay, you're telling me this abduction's all right. Sure. No, you just would not. Whether you even knew the people, it just to me says there's got to be something that they thought she would believe that was okay. And maybe it's because it speaks to what they're trying to touch on. If we're going to give them a benefit of the doubt for a moment in their approach to this scene, it probably is trying to speak to the fact that there's this growing underground kind of tone to the way that Jesus followers now have to be. Up until this point, it had seemed very public. It seemed very about the disciples following Jesus. Here we are, we're growing, we're doing our thing. And now it's this is starting to get dangerous. People's behavior is not like what it was. Jesus' behavior has changed. The disciples are now starting to get a little bit edgy. The idea of being approached in an alleyway and saying, hey, we need to abduct you for your own safety. Sure, it's very off, but also it's well, things are different now. People are having to approach the way they talk about Jesus a little bit different. There's schemes afoot. There's spies out there. So I think they're trying to lean into that side of things, where everything about the way following Jesus had been up to that point was shifting, and there was a feeling that some of it started to have to become a little bit more secret and a little bit more strategic.
Yeah, and as you noted in our last conversation, though, this scene problematic because not just only because of Mary Magdalene's past and then men being involved, but she's a woman, vulnerable, and you're depicting that on screen. Out of the many choices that the Chosen team have made to extend the biblical narrative, this was one of them where you could have done this a whole bunch of different ways, and I just don't really understand why you've done this in a way that's almost in and of itself distracting, and it doesn't need to be, because...
And we do get to learn who the mysterious figure is, though. The guy that is abducting, that we've said on this podcast we thought was maybe Luke, turns out to be Reuben, so we get that reveal.
Where's Luke then? When's he going to show up?
Yeah, maybe that's later.
Oh,
maybe
okay.
We've missed it. Maybe he was at the Passover and we didn't catch it because all of the timelines keep changing.
What we didn't miss, though, is the return of Nicodemus. And what we haven't missed also in this episode, we haven't talked about it yet, is Judas. Judas is quite at the fore in this one. Before we get onto those, Laura, can I just quickly mention that last episode, in our last conversation, we were both sharing about the device of the Last Supper opening every episode and where we're at with that. And in the previous episode, that one, I was a bit discombobulated by the choice of where you place that particular moment. On this occasion, I'm back, Laura. I'm back. I'm on board with what the Chosen's doing with the Last Supper. Maybe it's because that this was a moment where Jesus is sharing the very famous I am the vine, you are the branches, abide in me, which is just like, if that doesn't warm your heart, just saying that out loud, well, then say it more times and reflect on it and meditate on it, because it is a wonderful truth of the connection that Jesus has with his followers. Maybe that's why I'm back on board, Laura. It's just a personal favorite of mine. That's all The Chosen has to do. The filmmakers, the production team, all they have to do is just pick moments from scripture that I like and put them in an episode.
And you're all for it. You're suddenly thinking, this is the best episode ever.
Wow, what an objective way to have a look at a TV show. But I liked the kickoff with that, and it's very fitting across the rest of the episode as we continue. Like the last episode, we continue in a moment in The Chosen where there's a lot of explanation, a lot of links, a lot of furthering the plot, for want of a better description. And a big through line of that is, are you going to stick with Jesus or not? Do you believe Jesus or not? And Nicodemus, the return of Nicodemus, Laura, how are you feeling about that?
I want to know what they're doing with it, because one of the things, just from a really a funny practical point, so what we've learned about Nicodemus is that part of the time he's been away, and some of what he's been obsessed with in this time, is really starting to work out the connection between earlier Old Testament prophecies about who Jesus is and then what Jesus is starting to say. And we see Nicodemus with that big kind of classic, normally it's the murder wall, right? Where you're connecting suspects with the crime and who did what. He's got passages of scripture all kind of dotted out, and he's working out the connection between them and some of what he's seen.
That does have that sort of serial killer movie or TV show. I didn't even think of that until you're saying that now. You're right. But saying that out loud, and we're presuming that you're joining our conversation because you've watched the episode. If you haven't, what we just said, including about the abduction of Mary Magdalene earlier, if that didn't have you concerned, now we're talking about, there's this moment in The Chosen that looks like a serial killer, but it's not.
Check out Nicodemus murder wall. But I was there going, because I'm watching him look at the wall and looking at pieces of paper, and I'm like, Nicodemus, it would be way more practical if you didn't pin these on a wall and you actually had them on your desk to look at. I thought it's a nice visual way of representing the situation, but how annoying would it be to have everything up on a wall that you have to try and read what that says as you're trying to compare it with something else? The impracticality of that did bug me a little bit. I noticed that, and it bothered me. But I also
give a guy a chance, Laura. He doesn't have our printed Bibles or even let's say our apps, and he has to make do with what he has with the papyrus and all that kind of stuff. And maybe he was a wall learner, not a tabletop learner.
I will not criticize his learning style, but it did make me realize as well a little bit of the humor of The Chosen, which is something we have long liked. I started to realize as we got into the deep end of this episode, I feel like it's losing its humor. There are much less moments of just sort of a levity. There is a joke, I don't know if I think it's in the previous episode actually, where John is joking about the silliest thing that Simon's ever said, and they did adolescence together, and ha ha ha, joking about that. And then I went, a joke. It took me off guard, because I realized I haven't had a laugh out of The Chosen for a while. And so
I think that's just because, Laura, where we're at in the life story of Jesus?
Yeah, I think because of the tone everything is having to take now, because of where it is in the narrative, we are really getting to the pointy end of the emotional difficulty, the real difficulty of the series. So absolutely, there can't be kind of as much levity in that. And Jesus, who brought a lot of the humor in earlier episodes, which I think the Chosen production team were trying to show, Jesus was up for the fun. He danced at the wedding, all this sort of stuff. Jesus can't be making the funny little kind of comments that he did before, because his emotional state is different. And he still has that at times, but it's very much not there. And so it's a challenge, because you want to be able to enjoy and feel that sense of levity, but they're kind of having to abandon it a little bit more.
Yeah, I hadn't actually stopped to notice that, Laura. I think you're right on the money, but I think it's a tick in the column of The Chosen team for deciding to go this way, because, as much as any viewer tends to want levity in a movie, in a TV show at various points, very difficult to do it given the circumstances we find ourselves in. And I think we'd be saying other things, and other viewers too, if you were trying to let's inject the funny again. And maybe not, in between Judas talking about Judas talking with the high priest and getting the 30 silver coins. And we haven't actually touched on that yet, Laura. So before we do, Nicodemus, one of the things that struck me about him being back is how he has threaded together some Old Testament scripture and prophecy, what we call Old Testament scripture prophecy, what they call scripture,
life,
and being able to then start placing that upon Jesus. There's still evident confusion with Nicodemus and uncertainty about whether to call Jesus the Messiah or not. But talking about the light coming into the world of darkness was one of the moments in this episode where I really enjoyed how The Chosen is demonstrating for us everything that was predicted about Jesus and how it's coming to fulfillment. And look, we do need to get onto Judas, but I do know that there are a couple of things that you noticed about this episode, and one of them relates to Nicodemus and his wife.
This was something that once we got to the end of the episode, I thought that's been an interesting thread, because for me this was the episode of the wives, because you had Nicodemus' wife talking to him about what's become this scripture obsession, and she wants to know like what's going on with him. What is it that's taking your attention? You know, you're losing weight, you're not spending as much time with me and other things. And so you get her perspective on that. Then you also have Pontius Pilate's wife and her real unrest with what she can sense coming down the line and what her husband's role can be in that. And you also have Caiaphas' wife, who's really bothered by the way he's handling his processing of their daughter's death, and him thinking like Jesus wooed her spiritually, and if he didn't do that, she wouldn't have been where she was. And this is a story that's embellished around scripture. We know that, but the way that he's kind of handling that and how he then could potentially become somebody that helps Jesus get arrested and, of course, then crucified, his wife has her perspective on that. And I thought that was an interesting reoccurring theme in this, that the wives behind all of these figures, and two of them, ones we know more significantly in Scripture, to hear their thoughts, it reminds you that, again, of the context around these men that were in leadership, but also what role their wives potentially had alongside them, and how it would have been something for them to process what their husbands were doing and how they thought about it. Like that, I'm grateful to The Chosen for thinking about it, and I just noticed it was something they obviously decided to give more time to in this episode.
Yeah, I think it's a deft choice of The Chosen team. A couple of episodes ago, and we spoke about it on Following The Chosen, how an episode winds up with Jesus having dinner with his female followers, including his mum. And this, though, I think is an even better example of The Chosen much more subtly weaving in what surely must have happened, which is the women in and around Jesus' life had stuff to say and feel and react to. And many times in the pages of the Bible was recorded more of men in and around Jesus, particularly religious leaders or civic leaders. So I'm liking this, and it was so subtle, Laura, I didn't even notice it until you mentioned it. And then, oh yeah, you're right.
It's right
so
there.
It's a nice moment of embellishment where, the amount of things the Chosen team is trying to consider and bring in to fill out what that world would have seemed like, including, and this brings me to the Judas bit, Laura, they're really walking a tightrope of what's in Scripture and what's not. And what's not in Scripture is the clear motivation behind Judas, at least to my reading. I think there's trace elements. I think you can see in Judas's reaction to betraying Jesus in the pages of Scripture, you can start trying to piece together what was going on in his mind, let alone that this was foretold, let alone that in the plans of God this was going to happen. The Chosen, I had never stopped to think about this, Laura, that a possibility, and this is, you can correct me if I'm wrong or tell me what you think of this. What I'm getting from The Chosen is the suggestion that Judas may have betrayed Jesus because he believed he was the Messiah, and so if he does go through to this death, well, Jesus is going to defeat that somehow, stop it somehow, or on the other side of all of that, rise up as the leader, as the king, as the warrior that Judas expects he'll be.
Yeah, it's a kind way of imagining Judas, because it does suggest that he had a more well-intentioned motivation, that he wanted to be the one to showcase what Jesus could do, and if only, he would do it his way, if only Jesus would do what Judas sees, he would finally be seen to be this great Messiah that not everybody believed he was, etc. It is something that I don't know. Who knows if that was the truth? Maybe it is a little bit too kind to think that Judas was motivated in that way. I think I've always felt like it was more a financial motivation than kind of a something motivated by his belief around Jesus. I always feel like it's been much more around the way money had a hold on him. He was willing to do this, and that's where things got twisted up a little bit for him. But I do think even if it is not real or true to what Judas' motivation was, it's certainly a very unique way to approach it, and it's an interesting lens to look at things through. And I think it again comes back to how dynamic these individuals are. Like there would have been a lot more going through their mind, influencing their choices, than simply the few sentences that we get in scripture. And you have to think about, this is somebody that has spent 3 years with Jesus, who in one of a really powerful line, when Caiaphas is asking him about his belief in Jesus, and it's like, why do you believe in Jesus? And he says, because I've seen too much. And then it's like, well, but why are you here then? And he says, because I haven't seen enough. And so it kind of speaks to, he's been there for these 3 years. He has seen so much, and yet there's still a gap for him. It's like, I haven't seen Jesus do what I think he should do, and I want to set up the situation where he can.
I'm still very challenged by the sympathetic portrayal of Judas, but I realize some of that's me and almost an unwillingness to want to see Judas like this. And I think the chosen team, as much as sometimes they're heading towards territory that makes me uncomfortable, one of the things I really like about it is the inner challenge of trying to get into the head of Judas, which a lot of us don't even want to do. But the fact that they're trying to do it, and I don't think they're forcing us down this path as we watch this, and I also don't think it's overly sympathetic either. I think you could have gone further with this and really tried to reclaim Judas and almost make him out to be misunderstood or not the villain, quote unquote, of the piece, or whatever you might want to do, but they're not. I don't feel that. But I imagine there might be some that do. If you do, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you about your reaction to Judas, the return of Nicodemus, what went on with Mary. What was that going on with Mary? And all the other elements that are coming together at this moment in The Chosen. We love hearing from you. So drop us your thoughts in the comments on YouTube, Spotify, hopepodcast.com.au. Just like this episode, Laura, which I found ended really abruptly. Here's me ending really abruptly as we head towards Following The Chosen. We need to wrap up and move on and get on to the next episode. You're still going to be Laura Bennett from Hope Afternoons, and I'm Ben from Hope Mornings. Love having you with Following The Chosen. We'll see you next time.